candidates await their political fate. How nerve-wracking is the waiting game, and what are the national repercussions of this election? We are swapping out pundits now for a straight-up view of this election by those who've led their parties and have served as premier. This is our election edition of the Premier's League. Joining me from Vancouver, former BC Premier Ujjal Dosanjh. In Saskatoon, former Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall, now Special Advisor at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt LLP. And with me here on set, former Ontario Premier David Peterson, Chairman Emeritus and Senior Counsel at Castles Brock Lawyers. Hi to all three of you. Thank you so much for being with me. I appreciate it. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Peterson, and if you'll permit me to get personal, I might ask.
You can do whatever you want.
Thank you.
Let's invite these two guys to the Ontario election.
I wish they were here as well. I'm going to start with you, though, and ask, tell me a bit of insight into what it's like to be in the shoes of Kathleen Wynne or Doug Ford or Andrea Horwath tonight.
Depending on whether you think you're going to win or lose, it's either wonderful or awful. And you're sitting with your family and you're usually very close advisors, and you're watching all this. And this race is when we don't know what's going to happen. And there's a lot riding on this. I mean, Kathleen has already declared her position, so she's resigned to this. And she's handled this, in my view, with a great deal of dignity. She recognized the inevitable, and she recognized that she was the problem. She felt that, so she didn't want to hold the party back. And who knows what the repercussions of that would be electorally. But the other two, you know, they're both sitting there hopeful, and one of them's going to be disappointed tonight, unless something strange happens, and it could well be
never know.
Some kind of a minority, some kind of a not clear situation. So we'll know, but it's hard on the nerves. But I'll tell you one thing about political leadership. Everybody carries hope. Everybody kind of thinks they're going to win, even if they're not.
Interesting. Okay, Mr. Wall, actually, I have a funny story for you, because the first night of my entire career was the day you won the election as premier in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. So I remember it very clearly. Tell me what was going through your mind the night before.
Person's nervous. We had reasonable expectations of success for the next day. That would have been in early November of 2007. And the actual day, though, you wake up that day, and there's a few orders of business to take care of. At least there was in our case. I wanted to check in with the campaign co-chairs and get a sense of what was going around the province in terms of our Get Out the Vote campaign, and just sort of check in, you know, with those who are in the field, so to speak, and get a report back. And I did that, but I eventually, when those calls were done, I eventually just started pacing. I was hopeful about it, but I was kind of getting nervous, and Tammy my wife was home from work that day, and I think I sufficiently annoyed her, because at one point she said, just go outside and water the lawn, and do it by hand, which I did, actually. I really didn't know what else to do, so I literally was out there with a garden hose kind of watering the lawn, and then at the appropriate time we actually went and voted, of course, and the media are there and they want to see you vote. But it's a long day. You're obviously very anxious for the result. We were optimistic and hopeful, but I can tell you that the first few results that came in on the live television coverage, they weren't very hopeful for whatever reason. They weren't great polls. And at that point, I just left. I took our dog for a walk. By the time I came back, there were close friends and family there. And as I walked up the steps, a good friend of mine who I've known since grade 6 said, Brad, you're the premier, or you're the premier designate. And so that was, I'll never forget.
How did that feel?
Well, it was amazing. It was humbling in that moment, and that feeling really never left me for the 10 years I had the honor to serve. But it really crystallized in that moment, and I'll never, ever forget that particular quick exchange. And then we went inside the house and watched one of the results.
It's easy for you, Brad. You've never lost one. No wonder you're so happy.
Valid point.
No wonder you look so good all the time.
We were fortunate, David. We had a good team, good timing, and good luck.
You had great leadership, and you don't have to be modest here.
Let me bring Mr. Dosanjh in, because I had you on earlier this week. You come in with a very unique perspective in that you're probably one of the only people in the country that understands what Kathleen Wynne is going through right now, because you also conceded an election before the actual vote. How difficult, how much empathy do you have for her tonight?
Well, I think that she probably feels a sense of being liberated, in a sense that she's been campaigning hard, regardless of the concession trying to win some seats for the party. Therefore, she knows that she's going to lose the election. Therefore, there's no tension in her mind, except the only tension is that she wants to make sure that some seats are won, the party status is not lost in the legislature. Therefore, I think she's the freest of the three in that sense. And I think the only question she's pondering tonight, probably, other than the number of seats, is whether or not she is going to resign as the party leader tonight as she makes the concession speech.
What do you think she'll do?
Well, I can tell you what I did. My advisors were advising against it, and I basically said, look, I mean, I'm finished. I think I should free up the field for others to contend, and the party should be at peace rather than with knives out for one another. So I resigned the night as I made the concession speech, and that was the best thing I ever did, because then nobody tried to stab me or say anything bad about me. You know, you don't kind of whip a dead horse, right? So I think that might be a good thing for her to do.
Mr. Peterson.
One of the realities of losing in politics,
Absolutely.
You have to take responsibility. That's what leadership does. And Ujo referred to that, and I think that's where when I lost, I stood up and I resigned. Now, but also depends in these circumstances how many seats are left. You have to think about your party, you have to think about transition, you have to think about the next leadership. So who knows what will be left? So I think what she does tonight, and she is a very intelligent and classy human being. She will take responsibility, as she has to, but what she does specifically will depend. She may have to stay for a while, work with the party to arrange a transition of leadership. Who knows? We could be in a minority situation where her voice is very, very important in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we're still waiting for that.
Mr. Wall, you're nodding. I see you there.
David makes an excellent point. What if tonight's result is a minority basically by 1 seat? In other words, a majority is deprived by just 1. I think, and I've sat across the table from Premier Wynne now on many occasions. I think she's absolutely the kind of leader that's going to think about these things. Think about her party. Think about the impact on the legislature itself, the configuration at Queen's Park, and I think that's the kind of person Kathleen is, and I think Premier Wynne will be taking close stock of the actual results tonight before she makes her final decision as to what she'll say in her speech.
Brad's worked with her, and he knows and he's worked with a lot of premiers, as usual, and other people. He knows what a classy woman and intelligent woman she is. This is not.
She's also very formidable if you happen to be on the opposite side of an issue.
Well,
yeah, and obviously that commends itself to leadership too, David.
I agree with that. I saw her this week, and I can tell you she's at peace. And she's not sitting there, she's not bitter, she is not thinking inappropriately, she's not lashing out, and I guarantee you this, a year from now she'll be viewed totally differently than she is today.
On that note, I do have to take a quick break, but we will be back with the Premier's League. If the PCs win this election, provincial-federal relations could turn sour. Doug Ford plans to challenge the Liberal government's carbon pricing plan. Up next, as I mentioned, the Premier's League will be back for another round, this time to discuss potential effects of this election on the Federation.